What's going on, guys? Stefan here with you, S&E's Garage, and in today's video we are going to begin the process of pulling the engine out of this very hurt 2007 Toyota Camry. So if you saw our last video on this car, you'll know that we did compression and leak down, and we found definitive proof that we have an issue between cylinders 2 and 3, both leaking down into each other and into the cooling system. Plus, this thing is burning oil. If it only needed a head gasket, I would absolutely pull the head and leave the block in the car. But the fact that it's going to need pistons to stop the oil burning, it just makes more sense to get this thing out of the car than to try to work around, the vehicle. I'm going to have to flip the engine upside down, pull the balance shaft, pull the crank, pull the rods, pull the pistons. It's just easier to have the engine out of the car. So we went ahead, we ordered an engine stand. That should be here very shortly, and we are going to go ahead and begin the process of pulling this engine. Now, my plan here is to leave the transmission in the car. I'm going to try to leave as much in here as I can. I am going to disconnect the air conditioning compressor, move it out of the way. That way we don't have to worry about draining the refrigerant out of the air conditioning, and probably try to leave the exhaust in the car as well. The main reason I'm doing it this way is I want to have a rolling chassis, whereas if I were to drop the engine out of the bottom with the transmission on the subframe, the car is now stuck on the lift, and I don't want it to be stuck on the lift. So the engine's going to come out the top, but with that being said, we're just going to start disconnecting stuff. I've never pulled one of these before, so I don't have an exact order in what I'm going to go. I usually like to start on one side of the engine bay and move my way over. So we're probably going to start by pulling the battery, pulling the intake assembly, and getting as much of the stuff out of the way over here. And then we'll work our way over, probably starting with the engine harness, vacuum hoses, intake and exhaust manifolds. And I'm going to try to leave the exhaust manifold in the car, just unbolt it and kind of flap it forward. But we'll see how that works. Again, never pulled one of these before, so we're just going to take it as it goes. I'm probably going to do a lot of this in a time lapse, but I'll stop the time lapse in between different processes and kind of show you what we're doing. So the next step is, again, going to set you up on a time lapse. We're going to start here and just start stripping this thing down and loading up the trunk with spare parts.
Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down. Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we're gonna light it up tonight. We're gonna light it up tonight. We're gonna light it up just like the sunrise. We're gonna light it up now.
Alright guys, let me just show you kind of where we're at here. I know I said I was going to start over there. I decided to start over here because I had to start draining the fluids. So what we went ahead and did here is we pulled our torque mount out, the motor mount that prevents the engine from moving forward to back. We pulled out the bracket for it. Up underneath the car, I'm going to show you what we got going on under there. We did go ahead and unbolt the axle shaft carrier bearing from the back of the engine block. So that's disconnected. I'm going to show you that in just a second. And now what we're going to work on doing is going ahead and pulling the alternator belt and the drive belt out. That way we can, like I discussed before, pull the air conditioning compressor, move it aside so that we don't have to drain the coolant. And then we're just going to, like I said, we're going to steadily keep removing stuff. So let me get the car up in the air. I'll show you what we got going on under there. So before we do that, we pulled the belt. It's rather cracked and split and kind of junky, so we're putting all this work into the car. We're going to throw a belt at it, cheap enough. Let's get it up in the air, show you what's going on underneath. So right here on the back of the engine block, you're gonna see you have this bracket here, and that bracket holds this axle bearing onto the engine block. Obviously, we don't want that connected to the block because we're going to be pulling the engine and leaving, like I said, transmission in the car. So you're just gonna have to pull 1, 2, 3 bolts. I went ahead, I just left them over here on the lift arm. And then you're gonna stick a pry bar right in between that and just pop it up and out of the way, because if you look up top, it's pinned right there with basically, it's like a bush knock, they would call that, or it basically centers it. So you are gonna have to pry that off. Now, what I am going to do is I'm going to soak these exhaust nuts here down with some penetrating lubricant and let it sit for a little bit. And then we're gonna go ahead and try to zip that off. I think that would make my job a lot easier, and instead of leaving that manifold in the car and in the way, I can just pull it out. Now, in my last video, I had made mention that it was throwing a catalytic converter code, and I did not realize that this flex pipe is leaking quite badly. And the oxygen sensor that monitors that cat is after the exhaust leak. So this might not actually need a catalytic converter. The exhaust leak probably just needs to be fixed. So while I have this apart, I can go ahead and have that welded up, and maybe I can try to separate it from here and, you know, have that welded. But let's get back on the time lapse and let's get back top side and keep chipping away.
Just like a spark that's breaking out. Can't make a stop, can't turn back now. We know that there's no room for doubt. No, we can't turn back now. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna light it up tonight. We gonna light it up, babe. Tonight we gonna light it up just like the sunrise. We gonna light it up now.
All right, guys, full disclosure, we are learning as we go here. So my idea was, let's get this exhaust manifold out of the way. That way I have more room to get, you know, the belt drive taken care of. But, and that's a very big but, the problem is, in order to get the bottom exhaust manifold bolt out, you are going to have to remove the alternator. So you saw me get most of the bolts out for the manifold, and then I saw that last one. I said, all right, now it's time to get the alternator out. So the alternator's out, that's out, our air box is out. We ran into a stripped bolt with the air box, but if you go in between the PCM and the air box, there's two bolts, two little 10 millimeters that hold the bracket for the air box to the bracket for the ECM. I just removed that from there, and the whole bracket came out with it. And then we moved this harness from the front of the engine up and out of the way. So what I think I'm going to try to do now is go ahead and unbolt this air conditioning compressor, and like I said, move it off to the side so it's out of my way. And then we can go ahead and start disconnecting hoses. I have my upper hose, my lower hose, our heater hoses, and we have a ton of vacuum lines that we have to get off in order to remove the intake manifold. So let's go ahead and get back on that time lapse, and we're just going to keep going.
Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down. Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in your
hose is off, lower hose is off, thermostat's out. You'll see we have the AC compressor jammed up here against the radiator. Only issue I had is my bottom bolt here on the engine block unfortunately broke for the compressor. So once we have the engine out, I'll get that out with a pair of vice grips and we'll replace that bolt and take it from there. But now we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna keep on keeping on. Let's get the harness off of it, flop it over to the side, and then let's get the intake manifold out. Alright guys, so we have our intake manifold now to the point that it's loose and it's ready to come out, but we're having an issue getting it out because it's not clearing the wiper cowl. So what we went ahead and did is we pulled the cowl cover off, got that out of the way, we got the wiper arms off, and now we just have to pull this metal guy here out of the way. It's just held in with a bunch of 10mm bolts. We'll get that out and then we can lift our intake manifold straight up. Alright guys, so with that wiper cowl out, we have so much more room in here to work. I should have done that in the beginning. You'll see we have everything out over here. Along with the 10mm bolts that hold it in, you are, like I said, gonna have to remove the 4 bolts there for the wiper transmission. And then you're gonna have 2 strut bolts on either side of the car, so 4 strut bolts in total that you are going to have to remove. But now it's prime time here. I got all the room in the world to go ahead and finish getting the wire harness out of the way. I couldn't get the rest of the harness out of the way without first removing the intake because the harness goes underneath the intake. It's a hell of a design, but it's the way it is. So we got that out, and let's go ahead and keep going. All right guys, so we are now at a point that we are going to stop for the night. We have the whole wire harness off of the engine. Everything that has to do with the wiring for the engine is off. We have our exhaust manifold off, our intake manifold off. This thing's almost ready to come out. So tomorrow, what we're gonna do when we resume where we left off, we have to go ahead and remove the power steering pump from the front of the engine and then go ahead, push that aside. It's easier to do that than to make an absolute mess trying to crack the lines and then possibly ruining the lines. It's easier to just disconnect the whole pump and put it aside. And then we have our torque converter bolts. There's an access panel down at the bottom of the engine. I'll show you that when we get there. And then from there, it's just going around the transmission and pulling all the transmission bolts. And then we can go ahead and pull the motor. All right, guys, so off camera, we just went ahead and pulled the hood off the car. Mrs. S&E's Garage gave us a hand because I needed a second set of hands. So what I'm gonna do now is, first of all, you'll see we have our engine hoist here. We're gonna go ahead under the car. I'm just gonna throw you on a time lapse after I show you what we're doing, but we're gonna go ahead and pull the torque converter bolts, get them out, set our engine stand up once we get it back on the ground, and we're just gonna start taking off our bell housing bolts. Alright guys, so what we just went ahead and did is we pulled the power steering pump right here. You'll see it hanging off the back of the engine, so that is disconnected. We can leave the lines and everything in the car connected. So now we're going to go up and take care of the torque converter bolts.
Spark that's breaking out, can't make a stop, can't turn back now. We know that there's no room for doubt. No, we can't turn back now. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night, coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna light it up tonight. We gonna light it up, babe. Tonight we gonna light it up just like the sunrise. We gonna light it up.
torque converter bolts are out, as are all of the bottom bell housing bolts. Now we can go ahead and lower it and get to the bell housing bolts that are on top and get this engine out.
Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down. Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna light it up tonight. We gonna light it up, babe. Tonight we gonna light it up just like the sunrise. We gonna light it up now.
Alright guys, and that's going to be it for this video. It took about, maybe a good 3-4 hours of just solid work between today and yesterday to get this thing out. A couple things that I noted is probably going to have to put an axle in this thing because this bearing here on this axle is shot. You can just hear how loud it is, and somebody's going to hear that when they go to drive the car and not be happy. So I'm probably going to put an axle, and maybe I'll get that new bracket so I don't have to bother trying to beat the axle out of that because it's never fun. But beyond that, it went relatively easily. We did accidentally forget a ground on the cylinder head. I don't know if you guys caught that. I had to pull that. And the motor mount bracket on the side of the engine fought me a little bit. I had to lower the engine back down, pull that bracket off, and then get it out. But the engine's out. Like I said, it's down here on the tire. So now we are just waiting for our engine stand to get here. And while I'm waiting for the engine stand to get here, I'm kind of in limbo. I'm looking at a couple of used engines with lower mileage on them. I got my eyes really close on an engine out of a 2006 Tyon. I got my eyes on an engine out of a 2006 Scion TC. What's good about that engine is it's after they fixed the head bolt issue, but before they switched to the low tension rings. So that should not be an oil burner, but, and a very big but, the timing cover on that engine is slightly different, so I would have to take the timing cover off of this engine and put it on the other one. But whether we go good used engine or rebuild this one, we are going to be tearing this engine down and inspecting it and seeing exactly what happened. So even if we don't rebuild it, we're going to check it out. We're going to pull it apart, dissect it, and see what's going on. So like, share, subscribe, stay tuned. The next video on this car should be getting the new engine, freshening it up, putting it in, and then like I said, maybe we'll pull this axle out and put a new axle in. That way whoever gets the car doesn't have to hear that bearing roaring like crazy. But like I said, like, share, subscribe. We'll see you next time.